Germany has now made child pornography, possession of it, a misdemeanor, reducing the criminal penalties from a felony to a misdemeanor. Connor, tell us more.
Yes, as I said before, unfortunately, it seems the Germans are at it again. Like Rob mentioned, we have this as a full report on VT.com. If you want more details, you can go there and check that out. But last week, the German parliament voted to lower the criminal penalties for possession of child pornography and child sex abuse material from a felony to a misdemeanor. Basically makes it so the minimum sentencing has been reduced to just a few months now instead of years, as it should be. Or, maybe death for people who own child porn, but that's a bit extreme, I guess. Far be it from the Germans to ever take things to extremes.
Send them to the woods with a bear.
Yeah. That solves the rapist problem.
Would you rather be in the woods with a pedophile or a bear?
I'd love to see the bear destroy the pedophile, but that would just educate people on how scary bears are.
I'll take the pedophile because then I can kill him. Yeah. What?
You're also not a victim because you're an of age, like
exactly.
You're fine with the pedophile.
Pick on someone your own size. Yeah. I got you.
But the story was first broken by Redux Magazine, which is like a women and family-oriented publication that advances women's issues. They're the first ones who broke this. According to the text of the bill, translated from German into English, possession and acquisition... You have to
say it angrily like Germans do.
Well, can't be too German there. It tends to be threatening on the internet when you speak angrily in German. Possession and acquisition should in the future be punishable with a minimum penalty of 3 months imprisonment and distribution with a minimum penalty of 6 months imprisonment. The offenses regulated in the sections of the criminal code are therefore classified as misdemeanors and not as crimes.
Why?
I'll get to their explanation here, but possession of child sex abuse materials first made a felony in Germany in 2021, which
it took very long to do.
Only 2021, but that made the minimum sentence for it a year. This next post is from Libs of TikTok, who, like many other people on social media, picked up the story. We're talking about how outraged they are. They all got community noted, and if you can see that highlighted portion at the bottom. This is a complete misrepresentation. The law prevents people from going to jail for simply reporting child porn. Teachers, parents, etc. would otherwise be unable to present proof without going to jail. The community note itself is incorrect, and if you go look at some of these posts now, the community note has been removed because it seems like it was all political activists who were community noting these posts. Basically, what they're trying to say is that the intention behind the law was to make it so that, okay, say you're, a teacher and you happen to see on a student's phone or something, you intercept people distributing child porn. You'd have to download that or possess it in some way to bring it to the cops in order to get that, investigated. And there were no legal protections established for parents or teachers or anyone else who did that. And, the other goal they wanted to protect was children who make it of themselves, sometimes under coercion by online predators. They take pictures of themselves and then they send them out. That's technically distribution of child porn. No legal protections for them existed. But the reason the community note is so ridiculous is because that's not what the law does. Right. The law does not make special carve-outs and say, hey, obviously we don't want to imprison the people reporting it. Obviously we're not going after victims here. All the law does is, as a blanket reduction, anybody with child porn is now guilty of a misdemeanor and not a felony. And that is completely ridiculous. And the people who know that best are pro-pedophile activist groups, including one that Redux notes. It is called Krum 13 or K13, which is, quote, a self-help organization for pedosexuals. They're celebrating...
Wait, what's a pedosexual?
The nicer term for pedophile.
So that's somewhere between minor attracted person and pedophile.
Yes.
So they haven't gone full-blown map yet.
No, these are people who believe that being a pedophile is a legitimate sexual orientation. The guy who started this group has been convicted and sent to jail for child porn multiple times.
He looks, as you would expect.
Oh my God.
They're stumping for having the age of consent in Germany reduced to 12 years old. The fact that these people are so open and free about this and fear no consequence shows how horrific things have gotten,
as they would say.
Yeah,
they've been emboldened by left-wing governments.
Yeah. Just a quote from this guy from a 2014 interview he did. The taboo of pedophilia must finally be broken at all levels of society. If a pedophile can come out without fear of exclusion or even demonization, this is the best prevention against child sex abuse. Therefore, he talks about, there are many ways in which children can initiate sexual relationships with adults, and this is a good thing that should be legally defensible.
So the kids are asking for it.
The kids are asking for it, is what he says, which the fact that this guy is not buried in a deep, dark hole somewhere, again, just goes to show how emboldened things are. The bill will take effect in a few months, but it's far from the first time Germany has had to deal with this kind of thing. Just a couple months ago, another Redux article that was reported, we don't have that to throw up there. A 52-year-old male identifying as transgender was given a lighter sentence for possession of child porn after arguing that he only retained the materials to help him explore his gender identity. So
Come on.
he argued, because I'm becoming a woman, I needed to watch videos of little children to help me explore my gender identity. And the judge bought that, and he was, free to go on that.
Yeah, well,
after
you can't
a few
question
months.
his truth.
Exactly. Germany is at the forefront of this kind of thing in Europe. They have a reputation for some of the most horrific things like that.
If you remember, I had to look this up because I forgot what member of Pink Floyd actually had gotten caught, but Pete Townsend was arrested in 2003 after he used his credit card to access a site selling images of child sex abuse. And the reason that he told investigators that he had accessed that website, it was for research purposes.
Of course.
The same reason when I used to book guests for the Saucecast, I would follow all of the girls on Instagram, and my wife would go, "Why are you following all these cam girls?" And I would go, "It's research for work." But those women were of age. I want to make that clear. They were of age. But I can't imagine that as a parent, it's so... You see these children, right? They are so innocent. And my 14-year-old's not innocent anymore. I know that. Like today it happened. As I was leaving the house to go to work, I went to say goodbye and I opened his bedroom door and it was locked. And I went, "What are you doing in there?" Knowing what he was doing in there. At 14, I know what a young teenager is doing. At one point, he was my wholesome young sweet boy. Now he's a gross pervert. That's what happens. But my 5-year-old is so sweet and so innocent. And I can't imagine being in a position where I could make laws to protect that innocence, and I choose to do the exact opposite.
That's what I don't understand. Bipartisan, whatever, it shouldn't be an issue on left or right side. We all should be in agreement to protect children.
But they've made it that way.
What's the argument for it, though?
Well, so, Connor, you have the Magnus stuff?
Yes, that's the carve-out that they're trying to say. All the people who are defending the bill are saying, oh, it was just to protect parents and teachers and victims. But
What?
Because they're saying, if the teacher downloads it to show it to the cops, they could technically have charges brought against them. Okay, well,
So
then
they
just
still
don't
get
bring the
3 months
charges,
for
man.
it? Oh, yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just don't charge people who are innocent.
Do they have
my
the ability
God.
to make that decision on a case-by-case basis in Germany, or is it a blanket prosecution no matter what?
It's very unclear. This is the problem with a vaguely worded bill. But in effect, what it does, you can't even judge it based on the text of the bill. You judge it based on the effect. What it says is all people in possession of child pornography are now committing misdemeanors and not felonies. And like I mentioned, this has been an ongoing thing for several years now. But it goes back way, way further than that.
Oh, boy.
This is hardly Germany's first run-in with the absolute worst degeneracy known to humankind. Quick history lesson for you guys, if you're not big on studying things around the turn of the century. The Weimar Republic, which was the government of Germany formed after the end of World War I, 1918 to 1933. This was, the Germans were defeated by the Allies. Their government was completely restructured. Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated, and this was the new, more democratic form of government that was put in place. Hyperinflation and political extremism were rampant from day one, where basically all their money was worthless. They were being gutted by having to pay reparations to all the countries they invaded that, they ended up not paying off until 10, 15 years ago. That they had debt that lingered until very recently. And then they were decimated by the Great Depression as well once that went global. It was a problem that basically wiped out their society and their culture. We have this book here called The Europeans by a guy named Luigi Barzini. This is a travel book that was written during the time of the Weimar Republic. It was, I believe, last published in edition in the 80s. But this guy was a travel writer. He went to all different kinds of countries around Europe. This book has a section on Germany during the time of the Weimar Republic. It's a short chapter, but I want to specifically call attention to this one section where he talks about what it was like to walk around the city there. Quote, "There were men dressed as women, women dressed as men or little schoolgirls, women in boots with whips, boots and whips in different colors, sizes, shapes, promising different passive or active divestments. I saw pimps offering anything to anybody, little girls, little boys, robust young men, or, I suppose, animals. Time-saving frissions of all, as it allowed you to enjoy... Backing up. The story went around that a male goose, of which one cut the neck at the ecstatic moment, would give you the most delicious, economical, and time-saving frisson of all, as it allowed you to enjoy sodomy, bestiality, homosexuality, necrophilia, and sadism at one stroke. Gastronomy, too, if one could eat the goose afterwards. It's known that you could buy a child prostitute in Weimar, Germany for just a couple dollars on most street corners. It was a hotbed for the early pornography industry, and every other kind of horrific thing you could think of was going on the streets of the Weimar Republic. And Barzini continues, "I couldn't help wondering where all these monsters had come from, which Germany had generated them. Had they been there all the time, and if so, where had they been hiding? To be sure, under the parade ground perfection of Wilhelmian Germany, as under the impeccable appearance of Edwardian Britain, there had always been some concealed corruption of one kind or another. Scandals had occasionally broken out in public, a famous homosexual in the Kaiser's entourage, or had been murmured about with raised eyebrows in upper-class drawing rooms, but distinguished Germans and Englishmen had resigned from exalted positions and fled the country to live in a delectable, perpetual, and obscure exile. But both countries had been healthy and wholesome as one, or as a whole." Right here, that changed. The things that were kept in back rooms during the old monarchies changed around the turn of the century to this. And most of that would not have been possible without a man named Magnus Hirschfeld. He was a German Jewish guy who was a physician, a sexologist, philosopher, and doctor. He was known for all kinds of genius-level research that he did beginning in the early 1900s. He was, as I mentioned, a gay Jewish guy, which ended up, not being the ideal thing to be in Germany in the later years of his life. But during the Weimar period, he operated Europe's first gender transition clinic. He was one of the first researchers into gender transitions. It's called the Institute for Sexual Research. It opened in 1919. He was one of the first people to float the idea of gender fluid and third sexes and things existing that were outside the male-female category. He coined the term transvestite. And this is a post from Scientific American, a magazine that is absolute trash. They've also defended cannibalism and incest, but that's not today's story. Go back to my video from a few months ago on why you should hate journalists if you want more on them. But the first gender affirmation surgeries took place in the 1920s at a Berlin clinic that employed transgender technicians and nurses and was headed by a gay Jewish man. The Nazis destroyed it in their first book burning. This is a quote from their article. "The Institute would ultimately house an immense library on sexuality, gathered over many years and including many rare books and diagrams and protocols for male-to-female surgical transitions. In addition, psychiatrists for therapy, he hired a guy who was a gynecologist, and together with surgeon Edwin Gorbrandt, they performed male-to-female surgeries that in German literally translates to transformation of genitals. This occurred in stages: castration, penectomy, vaginoplasty, which they still practice today. Patients would also be prescribed hormone therapy, allowing them to grow natural breasts and softer features. This is a picture of one of their patients that they performed these operations on.
Yikes.
So
that's man to woman, correct?
Yes, correct. At the time, they couldn't do woman to man. They didn't have the technology yet. It hasn't improved since then. And
Making so much progress.
making so much progress. And to clarify, one of the surgeons, excuse me, who helped carry these operations out, after the Nazis rose to power in the early 30s, he was employed at a concentration camp doing experiments on the inmates there.
Stop.
So the guy who went, or who kind of rose to prominence doing gender transitions, became a Nazi scientist at a concentration camp.
What level of hell do you think he's?
Yeah, which just goes to show
The innermost.
it's always the same thing. Brutal medical experimentation on unsuspecting people. That's pretty much how that works. But when the Nazis officially took power in 1933, one of the first acts of property destruction they ever carried out was destroying the library at the institute that Magnus Hirschfeld founded. They burned all of his literature, they destroyed his textbooks, they destroyed records of how to do this, and I know the attack that's going to come. I'm not trying to defend Nazi ideology here. I'm just saying this was early on what they were pushing against. Before the Nazis went full-on National Socialist and tried to eradicate Jews and all the other horrific things they did, what they were doing was primarily pushing back against the unrestrained, degenerate behavior of the Weimar Republic. It had eroded their culture and turned it into where you had child prostitutes and male-to-female gender transitions.
So let me ask you a question. What it seems like is that what led or what leads to where we're heading with Germany reducing the punishment for child pornography would be this, like you said, a slow eradication of moral sexuality, I guess, which starts with this transgendered movement. Okay, so if we look at that and we go, okay, well, look at what happened in Germany with transgenderism, and now look 80 years later, 90 years later, 100 years later, and how they view child pornography. It's a slow culture shift, but it made that way. If we're applying that same logic to this, then when people refer to people now in America who stand against these type of gender mutilation surgeries and they say, well, those people are Nazis. Are they correct? Do you get what I'm saying? In one scenario, we're taking what happened in Germany and we're applying it to what is happening now and saying, hey, look, this could be happening here in the United States. In the same argument, could the people that are looking at people like me who have a problem with drag queen bingo and don't want my 5-year-old to learn about transgenderism, I want him to learn about being a boy. I'm sorry, is that weird that I want my 5-year-old son to play with boy toys and learn to be a man? People that think like that, do you see what I'm saying?
Yes,
Am I making
Rob,
any fucking sense, or have I lost my mind?
It's like what you just said before. The Democratic Party left you. So it's like, as Kelly said, why does it have to be a left-wing thing or a right-wing thing? Why can't it just be pedophilia is bad? But when one party gets so extreme that they consider anyone else who attacks them to be an extremist or a fascist or a Nazi or whatever.
Which is, okay, that's where I'm going.
And the center no longer exists because they capture all the mainstream institutions and bring them over to that side. Then everyone in the middle is forced to join the other side, which is the right-wing side. But then what if that right-wing side decides that the other side has gotten so extreme that it needs to become extreme in order to fight them? And what you have then is two absolute
extremes.
poles, communism and fascism. And that is what World War II was, because the Communist Party was actually stronger in Germany than it was in Russia. Actually, Arthur Zimmermann, who was a German in the Weimar Republic government, allowed Lenin to go back to Russia during World War I, and that is when Lenin kicked off the Bolshevik Revolution, which started the Soviet Union.
And
so
interviews with
weaponized against them.
so
too.
he weaponized against it because he was like, we'll give them communism and bring down the Russian government. That'll make Germany stronger. 10 years later, communist Russia is all powerful, and they fight Germany in another world war, and the Nazis started. The Nazis really started their party based on fighting the communists who were trying to take over local governments.
That's what I was going to say.
The Spartacist uprising in 1918 was led by Rosa Luxemburg and Edward Bernstein, I believe, and Karl Kautsky. And they were socialist communists who took over a town. And then World War I veterans were like, we're just going to take matters into our own hands. These socialists, we're going to take them down. Those veterans who teamed up to take down the radical, they were literally Antifa, because Antifa is a German thing. That was started to fight against the Nazis later by these communists and anarchists. Those World War I patriotic veterans who took down the socialists, they were the Freikorps, the paramilitary group, which later became the military arm of the Nazi Party.
Interviews with captured Nazi soldiers during World War II, when people asked, or the Allies were asking them what they thought they were doing, almost all of them, up until the very late stages of the war, were under the impression everything they were doing, both domestically and internationally, was to stop communists. They didn't mention Jews, they didn't mention gypsies and homosexuals and every other group that the Nazis are known for going after. They thought they were purging communists from German society. And so much of what they were doing, especially early on, was this reaction to degenerate, communist-backed cultural degradation.
Yeah, so but when things become irrational like that, it's easy. Now the Germans have all the power, like the Nazis have all the power, then the lunatics at the top of that party can just start experimenting. Like maybe we'll run experiments on people. We'll start
sew kids together and stuff.
When the
those
pendulum
people-
swings back too far.
Those people should not be the leaders of that party.
Exactly, but
People
they're-
like you that might have been left needs to call out and be like, no, we are all in agreement that we need to protect children and this is not okay, and take your party back.
But Rob, think about it this way. Imagine if when your 5-year-old is at school, somebody comes along and indoctrinates him with transgenderism. He decides he's a girl. He goes through all the stages. It destroys your family as he's doing it. He wants to medically transition and socially transition when he gets old enough, and all the things they're trying to do to kids under 18. They deny it's happening, but it is happening. It's been proven dozens of times. And he goes through all that. What do you think that would do to you on the inside? Like, what do you want to do to the people responsible for that?
Well,
that would push you into a much more extreme category.
Well, you look
when
at
it
what's
hit you.
going on with what's okay. When you look at what's going on in Gaza and people calling it a genocide, and they talk about the thousands, the tens of thousands of women and children who have died in Israel's response to October 7th, you look at that and you go, okay, well, if I'm a man in Palestine, if I'm in Gaza, and my family, I've minded my own business, I've done my job, I go to work, I pay my bills, I follow the rules, I live in this open air prison, but I abide by the rules of the open air prison. I'm not throwing rocks at Israel. I'm not going up to kids wearing yarmulkes and kicking them in the face. I mind my own business. And all of a sudden my house gets carpet bombed and my family dies inside of it. Am I going to go, you know what? Well, fuck, that sucks.
Yeah.
Or am I going to go, I want justice. I want revenge. It's
At the same
going
time-
to, it's taking normal people and turning them into monsters
Or imagine
because
you're-
what you're
you're an
doing to their
Israeli.
families.
Imagine you're an
yeah.
Israeli who's always been nice to your Palestinian neighbors. You don't have any particular issue with them. And then Hamas comes in and does what they did. And suddenly you have, well, I guess that we do kind of have to go over that. That's how two sides reach a point where they can never compromise on anything or figure it out. There's no way back from that. These conflicts just keep happening. And like you said, it's understanding what happened in Germany and the parallels to what is happening today. Because Scientific American, again, draws that parallel as they conclude their story about how great Magnus Hirschfeld's clinic was. I'll leave us with this. The future doesn't always guarantee progress. Even as time moves forward and the story of the Institute for Sexual Research sounds like a warning to our present moment. Current legislation, and indeed calls even to separate trans children from supportive parents, bears a striking resemblance to those terrible campaigns against so labeled aberrant lives. Goes on to, it bashes Florida. It bashes evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins for criticizing Rachel Dolezal and saying that trans people are just like her. And then
She was transracial, right?
yes.
Yeah.
And he's saying, Richard Dawkins was saying transgender people are just the same. Like
Rachel Dolezal, pull that back up real quick. How do you pronounce her last name?
Rachel
Dolezal?
Dolezal, a civil rights activist who posed as a black woman.
At that kind of stuff, you have to look and go, okay, well, like, remember, finding the funny, right? That is lunacy right there, that she's a civil rights activist
Who's not actually black.
who's not, she's transracial. And how dare you for stating otherwise?
Exactly.
So you lose all credibility when you make a statement
But
like that.
back to the article. Looking back on the story of Hirschfeld's clinic, his protocols not only for surgery, but for a trans-supportive community of care, for mental, physical healing, and for social change. It's hard not to imagine a history that might have been. What future might have been built from a platform where sexual intermediaries were thought of in more just terms? Still, these pioneers and their heroic sacrifices helped to deepen a sense of pride and of legacy for LGBTQ plus communities worldwide. As we confront oppressive legislation today, may we find hope in the history of the Institute and a cautionary tale in the Nazis who are bent on erasing it.
Oh my.
So what they are saying, and this magazine doesn't speak for everyone who thinks this way, but it certainly is a thing that's echoed by them. If you disagree with what the Hirschfeld Clinic did, if you disagree with transgenderism, if you disagree with gender ideology, you are no different than the Nazis. And that's the problem with a very shallow two-dimensional understanding of history, is that when Nazi just immediately equals bad, and you understand absolutely nothing about why it happened, it's going to happen again. And for people who are very, very concerned about the return of Nazism, they are certainly doing their damnedest to act like Weimar Germany. Yeah. So clearly they learned nothing either.
It sounds like the writer of that article for Scientific America, is that what it is? It sounds like that person needs a head transplant. And that leads us to our next topic. Thank you, Connor, for enlightening us on German transgenderism and the history of it.